The dust motes danced in the shafts of bright afternoon sunlight that cut through the front window of the old shop. It was a quiet Wednesday, the kind where the silence feels heavy and thick, settling over the wooden floorboards like a blanket. Inside, a young woman named Clara was busy trying to make the shelves look full. It was a hard job because the shelves were actually quite empty. She stood on a step stool, carefully lining up tins of peaches and bags of flour, trying to space them out so the gaps didn't show. This store had been in her family for a very long time. Her grandfather had built it with his own hands, and her father had run it for 40 years. Now it was Clara's turn to hold the fort, but the fort was crumbling. The bills were piling up higher than the tins on the shelf, and the weight of it all sat on her shoulders like a heavy backpack. She brushed a stray lock of hair out of her face, leaving a smudge of flour on her cheek. She was tired, a deep kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. She loved this place, but love didn't pay the suppliers, and it certainly didn't fix the cracked windows. The bell above the entrance didn't jingle like a cheerful greeting. It gave a tired, metal clang when the front glass pushed open. Clara didn't look up immediately. She was busy adjusting a jar of local honey to hide the empty spot behind it. She assumed it was old Mr. Henderson coming in for his usual newspaper and packet of tobacco, or perhaps a tourist lost and looking for directions to the highway. "Be right there," she called out, her voice sounding a bit raspy. She stepped down from the stool and smoothed down her apron. When she finally looked toward the counter, she stopped in her tracks. The man standing there was not Mr. Henderson. He was dressed in a simple, dark flannel shirt that looked like it had been worn 1,000 times, faded to a soft gray. He had on a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and his shoulders were hunched forward, as if he was trying to make himself smaller. He looked like someone who didn't want to be noticed. He was looking at a display of beef jerky, studying the back of a packet with intense focus. Clara walked behind the counter, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the worn floor. She watched him for a second. There was something familiar about the way he stood, a certain stillness, but she couldn't place it. Her town was small and strangers were rare, but she was too tired to play the guessing game. "Can I help you find anything?" Clara asked, leaning her elbows on the glass counter. She tried to smile, but her face felt stiff. The man jumped slightly, as if he had forgotten anyone else was in the room. He turned to her, and under the brim of the cap, she saw a pair of incredibly sad eyes. They were dark and deep, holding a look that said he had seen a lot of the world and maybe didn't like most of it. "Just this," he said. His voice was quiet, polite, and rough around the edges. He placed a bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich on the counter, "and maybe a pack of those mints if you have them." "Sure thing," Clara said. She turned around to grab the mints from the shelf behind her. As she did, she glanced at the reflection in the dusty mirror hanging on the back wall. She saw the man looking around the shop. He wasn't looking at the prices or the products. He was looking at the structure. He looked up at the high ceiling, noticing the water stains that Clara tried to hide with hanging plants. He looked at the floorboards that were starting to warp. He looked at the peeling paint near the door frame. It was a look of empathy, not judgment. She turned back and placed the mints on the counter. "That'll be $12.50. The man reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out a crumpled wad of bills. He straightened them out with slow, deliberate movements. His hands were rough, his knuckles scraped. As he handed the money over, his fingers brushed against Clara's palm. His skin was cold. "You have a beautiful place here," he said softly. It wasn't the empty compliment people gave just to be nice. He said it like he meant it, like he was trying to find the beauty in a place that was clearly struggling. Clara let out a short, humorless laugh. She couldn't help it. The stress of the morning had been bubbling up inside her all day. "It looks better with the lights dim," she admitted. "We're hanging on by a thread, honestly." The man paused. He didn't take his change immediately. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. He noticed the flour on her cheek, the shadows under her eyes, and the way her hands were shaking slightly from too much coffee and not enough food. "It shows," he said gently. "You look like you've been carrying a lot of heavy things lately." Clara felt a sudden lump in her throat. It was such a strange thing for a stranger to say. She expected customers to complain about the heat or ask for a discount. She didn't expect them to see her. She blinked rapidly, trying to push back the tears that threatened to spill over. She didn't want to cry in front of a customer, especially not this one. "Just the usual life stuff," she managed to say, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everyone has their own battles, right?" The man nodded slowly. He finally took his change and stuffed it into his pocket. He picked up his water and sandwich. He should have turned around and left. That was what normal people did, but he didn't. He lingered for a moment, his hand resting on the countertop. "My dad used to have a shop like this," he said, looking toward the empty shelves again. "Not exactly the same, but the feeling. It's hard to keep the history alive when the world keeps moving so fast around you." "It is," Clara whispered. She felt a strange connection to this lonely traveler. "I'm just trying not to be the one who lets it die." He looked at her sharply then, his eyes intense. "You aren't letting it die. You're the only thing keeping it alive. Don't forget the difference." With that, he gave a small, sad nod and turned toward the glass pane of the door. He pushed it open, the metal bell clanking again, and stepped out into the bright afternoon. Clara watched him walk down the street. He didn't get into a flashy car. He just walked away, his hands in his pockets, his head down. She looked down at the counter where he had been standing. Sitting there, next to the register, was a $20 bill. He had paid with a 20, left the change, and then left an extra 20 on top of it. Clara picked up the bill. It was crisp and clean compared to the dusty shop. She looked out the window again, but the man in the flannel shirt was gone. She didn't know his name, and she didn't know why he cared. But for the first time in months, the weight on her shoulders felt just a tiny bit lighter. She put the money in the register, took a deep breath, and turned back to the shelves. There was still work to do. The morning sun beat down on the cracked pavement outside the store, but it didn't bring any warmth. Inside, the air felt stale and heavy. The young woman stood behind the counter, her hands shaking as she held a piece of paper. It was a notice from the bank. The words were formal and cold, talking about debts and deadlines and urgent action required. It felt like a physical blow to her stomach. She had been fighting so hard to keep this place alive, working double shifts, skipping meals, and ignoring her own tired body. But it seemed like it wasn't going to be enough. The numbers on the page were bigger than anything she could fight. She crumpled the paper in her fist and walked out the front door. She couldn't breathe in there anymore. She needed air. She sat down on the old metal bench that sat near the entrance. It was painted a chipping green color, and the metal was cold even through her jeans. She put her head in her hands, resting her elbows on her knees. She didn't cry yet. She was too exhausted for tears. She just stared at the dirt between her shoes, feeling a hollowness in her chest that scared her. This wasn't just a shop, it was her family's history. Losing it felt like losing her father all over again. The sound of a motorcycle engine cut through the quiet morning, but she didn't look up. Bikes passed through town all the time, usually loud and disruptive. This one, however, seemed to sputter and die down rather than roar away. A few seconds later, heavy boots scuffed on the sidewalk. "Hey," a voice said. She looked up, squinting against the bright light. It was the man from the day before. He was wearing the same worn leather jacket, though today he had a simple t-shirt underneath. He wasn't wearing the hat, and his dark hair was messy from the helmet he had just removed. He held the helmet under one arm and looked at her with a concerned expression. "I think I left this here yesterday," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a cheap plastic lighter. "I was looking for it all night." The young woman stared at him for a moment, her mind still stuck on the bank notice in her pocket. "Oh," she said softly, "yeah, I found it on the counter. I put it in the jar by the register." He nodded but didn't move to go get it. He looked at her face, then at the way she was sitting, hunched over like a broken tree branch. "You look worse today than yesterday," he said. It wasn't an insult, it was just an observation, spoken gently. "Rough morning," she replied, her voice cracking. She tried to clear her throat, to put on the brave face she showed to customers, but it wouldn't stay up, not in front of him. There was something about his eyes that made it impossible to lie. They were kind eyes, eyes that had seen their own share of bad days. "Do you mind if I sit?" he asked, gesturing to the empty spot on the bench. "Go ahead." He sat down with a sigh, leaning back and stretching his legs out. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at the street, watching a stray dog sniff at a trash can down the road. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt safe. He wasn't rushing her. He wasn't checking his watch or looking at his phone. He was just there, "They're going to take it," she whispered, the words finally spilling out. She didn't know why she was telling a stranger this, but she couldn't hold it in. The bank. "My dad built this place with his hands, and they are going to take it because I can't make the math work." The man turned his head to look at her. He didn't look away. He didn't give her a fake smile or tell her it would all be okay. He just listened. "It's not just the money," she continued, her voice getting stronger as the frustration poured out. "It's the memories, every shelf, every dent in the floor. It's him. If I lose the building, I lose the last place where he still feels real, and I feel like I'm failing him. I tried so hard." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, angry at herself for crying. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm dumping this on you." "You're just a guy who lost a lighter." He let out a small, soft chuckle. "It's okay. Sometimes it's easier to talk to the people we don't know. There's no history to get in the way." He shifted on the bench, turning his body slightly toward her. "I know a little bit about losing things," he said slowly. "People think that if you have money or if you're successful, you can fix anything. But you can't buy back time. You can't buy back the people you miss. And you can't just turn off the pain." He looked down at his hands. "I lost someone I loved a long time ago, and for a while I thought the world ended right there. I felt like I was walking through deep water, just trying to gasp for air." The young woman looked at him, really seeing him for the first time. She saw the lines around his eyes and the sadness that seemed to live permanently in his expression. "Did it get better?" she asked. "Changed," he corrected her. "It didn't get better, not really. You just learn to carry the weight differently. You build a structure around it so it doesn't crush you. That shop in there," he pointed his chin toward the building. "That's your structure. It's the thing you built to keep going. If you let it go, you're letting go of the part of you that is still fighting. It's hard to fight when you're outnumbered," she said. "You aren't outnumbered," he said firmly. "You're just fighting the wrong way. You're trying to use a shovel to dig through a mountain. You need help. You need a plan." He stood up then and dusted off his jeans. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It looked like a receipt or a napkin. He smoothed it out on his palm and took a pen from his pocket. "This is the number of a friend of mine," he said, scribbling quickly. "He's an architect. He helps people fix old buildings. He doesn't do it for the money. He does it because he likes saving history. He's a good guy. He owes me a favor." He handed the paper to her. It was just a name and a phone number, written in messy, jagged handwriting. "Call him," the man said. "Tell him I sent you. He can look at the structure, tell you what needs to be done to stabilize the place so the bank backs off. Maybe get you some grants." She took the paper, her fingers brushing against his again. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at her, and for a second the famous face that the world knew flashed through his disguise. It was just a quick glimpse of the actor everyone recognized. But then it was gone, replaced again by the tired, humble traveler. "Because once someone sat on a bench with me when I felt like the world was ending," he said simply. "And they didn't ask for anything in return. You just pass it along." He put his helmet back on, covering his messy hair. "Get your lighter inside," he said with a small smile, "and make the call. Don't let the mountain win." He walked over to his motorcycle, kicked the engine to life, and put on his gloves. She watched him pull away, the sound of the bike fading into the distance. She looked down at the crumpled paper in her hand. It wasn't a magic fix. The problems were still there, the debts were still real, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She stood up, took a deep breath of the fresh air, and walked back into the shop. She picked up the lighter from the jar and put it in her pocket, right next to the phone number. She went to the back room to find her phone. It was time to make a call. The phone number sat on the counter for 3 whole days. It stared up at her every time she rang up a customer, a small, crumpled ghost of a conversation. She had picked up the receiver a dozen times, her fingers hovering over the buttons, but fear always stopped her. Fear that it was a joke, fear that the architect would laugh, or worse, fear that it was real and she would have to admit she needed saving. On the 4th morning, the bank called again. The voice on the other end was stern, setting a final deadline that felt like a guillotine dropping. That was the push she needed. With hands that were damp with sweat, she dialed the number. It rang only twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Hello?" "Hi," she said, her voice trembling. I was given this number by a friend. He said you could help with an old building. There was a pause on the line. Did this friend have very tired eyes and ride a motorcycle? She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Yes. Yes, that's him. All right then, the man said, his voice softening. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Don't worry about the money right now. Let's just see what we're working with. True to his word, a large truck pulled up outside the store the next day. A man with gray hair and a beard stepped out, carrying a heavy rolled-up blueprint case. He didn't look like a city suit. He looked like someone who worked with his hands. He introduced himself simply as Paul. He spent the entire day climbing over the roof, measuring the warped floorboards and sketching notes on a yellow pad. He didn't talk much, just nodded and hummed. When he was done, he sat on a crate with her and her father. Her father looked frail, sitting in his favorite chair by the heater, but his eyes were bright with a flicker of hope. The structure is solid, Paul said, tapping the drawing. It's just tired. It needs a new roof truss and some support beams in the back. If we fix those, the bank will see it as an asset, not a liability. I can draw up the plans for the permits. I know some guys who can do the labor cheap just for the experience. But the materials, she whispered, I can't afford lumber. We don't buy new, Paul said with a shrug. We reclaim. I know a place. It felt like a miracle, but it was a miracle made of sawdust and hard work. 2 days later, the roar of a motorcycle returned. She looked up from the register to see the stranger walking through the door. He wasn't wearing the helmet this time. He had his jacket thrown over one shoulder, wearing a gray t-shirt that had seen better days. He looked around the shop, now filled with ladders and tools. Looks different, he said, walking over to where she was standing. It looks like a mess, she replied, but she was smiling. It looks like progress, he corrected her. He spotted Paul in the back discussing measurements with her father. The stranger nodded approvingly. Paul knows his stuff. He won't steer you wrong. I can't thank you enough, she said, feeling that lump in her throat again. I don't know how to pay you back for this. I told you, he said, leaning against the counter, you don't pay me back. You just keep going. Over the next few weeks, the store transformed into a hive of activity. Paul and his crew were there every day, and strangely, the stranger was there often, too. He didn't come every day, but he would pop in 3 or 4 times a week. Sometimes he would just sit and drink coffee, watching the work. Other times, he would roll up his sleeves and help. She watched him one afternoon, struggling to lift a heavy stack of wooden pallets with Paul. He wasn't the strongest man there, and he wasn't loud or bossy. He just did the work. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm, leaving a smudge of dirt on his face. He laughed when her father made a bad joke about the price of nails. He ate a bologna sandwich on the back steps, sitting on the concrete, just like a regular laborer. One evening, the sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the floor. They were alone in the shop for a moment, cleaning up the sawdust. He was sweeping, moving the broom in slow, rhythmic strokes. People are starting to talk, she said, leaning on her broom handle. In town, I mean, they see a guy helping out and they get curious. They think they recognize you. He stopped sweeping and leaned on the broom, looking at her. Does it bother you? No, she said honestly. It confuses them, but it doesn't bother me. They're just excited. They think you're. Well, they think you're someone else. Good, he said, a small smile playing on his lips. Let them think what they want. Today, I'm just the guy who sweeps floors. He looked around the shop. The new beams were in place. The roof was sealed. The air smelled of fresh pine instead of mold. It felt like a building again, not a tomb. You did the hard part, he said quietly. You opened the door, you made the call, I just made a suggestion. It was more than a suggestion, she insisted. You gave me permission to hope. That's a powerful thing. He looked down at his boots. Hope is dangerous, he murmured almost to himself. It hurts when it gets crushed. But it's the only thing that keeps us moving. He straightened up and put the broom away. I have to go away for a little while, he said suddenly. Work, but Paul will finish the job. He won't leave you hanging. The disappointment must have shown on her face because he reached out and patted her shoulder gently. It was a fatherly touch, warm and reassuring. Hey, he said. Look at this place. You saved it, not me, not Paul. You're the one who stayed. She looked around the shop. He was right. The walls were the same, the floor was the same, but the feeling was different. It was alive. She realized then that he hadn't just given her a contractor. He had given her the belief that she was worth saving, too, and that belief was stronger than any wood or nail. I'll come back when it's done, he added, pulling his jacket on. I want to see the finish line. He walked to the door, the metal bell clinking softly. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the twilight. You're doing good, kid, he said. Then he was gone, disappearing into the purple evening. The shop was quiet again, but it wasn't lonely. It was full of promise. She picked up her broom and finished sweeping, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The air in the town had turned crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of dry leaves and wood smoke. It was the kind of beautiful autumn morning that makes you feel alive, the kind where the sky is a deep, endless blue, and the sunlight seems to make everything glow. For the young woman standing behind the counter of the shop, the light felt different than it had in years. It wasn't a harsh spotlight showing the dust and the cracks. It was a warm, welcoming glow that made the polished wood floors shine. The shop was unrecognizable, yet completely familiar. Paul and his crew had worked miracles. The sagging roof was now braced with sturdy, reclaimed timber that gave the place a rustic, sturdy feel. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a warm, calming color that made the space cozy. The shelves, which had been bare and sad just months ago, were now stocked with goods from local farmers and makers. Jams, honeys, handmade soaps, and fresh bread filled every corner. The shop wasn't just a store anymore, it was the heart of the town again. Today was the grand reopening, and the nerves were bubbling in the young woman's stomach. She adjusted the open sign in the window, her fingers trembling slightly. She wore a clean, new apron over her dress, and she had actually taken the time to fix her hair. Her father sat in his usual spot by the heater, looking stronger than he had in a long time. He was beaming, his eyes sparkling as he watched the people gathering outside through the large glass panes. "They are coming, honey," her father said, his voice filled with a pride that made her heart ache. "Look at them all." She looked out. The sidewalk was filling up. Neighbors she hadn't seen in years, people who had shopped at the big chain stores for a decade, were all standing there, smiling and holding flowers. But her eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for a familiar worn leather jacket and a messy head of dark hair. Just as she was about to turn away and unlock the front door, a motorcycle pulled up to the curb. It wasn't loud and flashy. It rumbled with a deep, steady purr. The man dismounted and kicked the stand down. He wasn't wearing the helmet today. His hair was windblown, and he wore a simple gray hoodie under his leather jacket. He looked like he had just ridden for hours, but there was a peacefulness on his face that hadn't been there the last time they spoke. He didn't walk to the front of the line. He stood off to the side, leaning against a lamppost, his hands tucked into his pockets. He caught her eye through the glass and gave a single, slow nod. No big wave, no shouting. Just a quiet acknowledgement. He had come back just like he promised. She unlocked the door and the bell rang out, a happy, clear sound this time. The crowd surged in, laughing and talking. The air filled with the sounds of a community reconnecting. For the next 2 hours, the young woman barely had a moment to breathe. She was running the register, hugging old friends and thanking people for coming. The energy was electric. The shop was alive, buzzing with a warmth that chased away the ghosts of the past. Around noon, the rush died down slightly. She looked over to the corner of the shop near the bins of fresh apples. The stranger was there. He wasn't buying anything. He was helping an elderly woman reach for a jar of pickles on a high shelf. He handed it to her with a gentle smile, and then bent down to pet a golden retriever that a customer had tied up outside. The dog was wagging its tail so hard its whole body was shaking. The man scratched the dog behind the ears, whispering something to the animal that made it settle down instantly. He moved through the store like water, flowing around the obstacles, always stepping aside to let someone pass, always holding a door open, always smiling with his eyes. He didn't act like a movie star. He didn't act like the savior of the store. He acted like a neighbor. He fit in perfectly. The young woman walked over to him, wiping her hands on her apron. "You made it," she said. "I told you I wanted to see the finish line," he replied, picking up an apple and examining it. "It looks incredible. You did good." "We all did," she corrected him. "Paul, the guy's my dad, and you, if you hadn't sat on that bench," he held up a hand to stop her. "I just sat on a bench. You did the heavy lifting. Don't give me credit for your strength." Her father called her over to meet someone, and she turned away for just a second. When she looked back, the stranger was at the counter. He had picked out a sandwich and a bottle of water. The exact same things he bought on that first, terrible day months ago. He placed a $20 bill on the counter. "Keep the change," he said to the young woman's father, who was manning the register for a bit. "Oh no, son," her father protested, reaching for the tip jar. "I can't take that. You've done too much already." The stranger gently pushed the old man's hand back. "It's for the shop. Put it in the repair fund. Or buy yourself a nice lunch." He looked up and saw the young woman watching him. He winked, picked up his food, and walked toward the back storage area where it was quieter. She followed him. He found a crate and sat down, unwrapping his sandwich. She leaned against the doorframe, just looking at him. "You know," she said softly, "the whole town is whispering. They know who you are. They see you, and they see the guy from the movies. But they are pretending not to, because they see how hard you're trying to be normal. They respect that. I'm not trying to be anything," he said between bites. "I'm just a guy eating a sandwich in a really nice store." "You're a good man," she said. "In a world where people usually just want to be seen, you spend all your time trying to make sure other people are seen. You saw me when I was invisible." He swallowed hard and looked down at his boots. The playfulness left his face, replaced by that deep, oceanic sadness again. "We're all invisible sometimes. We just need someone to turn on the lights." He finished his sandwich in silence, crumpling the wrapper into a ball. He stood up and dusted off his pants. "I have to get going. I have a long ride back." She felt a pang of sadness, but it wasn't the desperate sadness of before. It was a sweet sadness, like saying goodbye to a friend who you know will always be in your corner. She didn't try to hug him because she knew he valued his space, but she wanted to. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," he said. He walked out through the store, weaving through the customers. He stopped to pet the dog one more time at the door. As he pushed the glass panel open, the bell chimed. He stepped out into the bright autumn sun and put his helmet on. He didn't look back. He just got on his bike, started the engine, and rode off down the street, becoming a part of the scenery, a memory etched into the history of the shop. The young woman stood in the doorway, watching him go until he was just a dot on the horizon. Then she turned back to the shop. It was full of noise and life and light. Everything had changed. He hadn't just fixed the building, he had fixed the spirit of the place. And for the first time, she knew she was going to be okay. Time moved differently in the shop after that. The seasons seemed to blur together, bringing a rhythm to the days that felt steady and sure. The panic that used to wake the young woman up in the middle of the night was gone. In its place was a quiet hum of activity. The store wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. The renovations had worked, and the community had rallied around the place in a way she had never dared to hope for. But the changes went deeper than just new wood and fresh paint. The shop had evolved. With the steady income, she was able to do something she had always dreamed of but never had the courage to try. She cleared out the dusty back storage room, the place where the stranger had sat and eaten his sandwich that day, and turned it into a small gallery space. She invited local artists to hang their paintings on the walls and potters to display their bowls on the shelves. It became a hub for creativity. On weekends, the shop would be filled with people drinking coffee, looking at art, and talking. It was exactly the kind of living, breathing space her father had always wanted the store to be. 3 years passed. The leaves began to turn gold and red again, just as they had on the day of the reopening. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind of lazy day where the dust motes dance in the light and the clock on the wall ticks loudly. She was organizing a display of handmade candles when a delivery truck pulled up outside. It wasn't the regular mail truck. It was a courier service, the kind that delivers important packages. The driver walked in carrying a medium-sized box wrapped in plain brown paper. He placed it on the counter with a thud. "Need a signature here," he said, tapping his clipboard. She signed her name, her curiosity piqued. She looked at the return label, but it was just a P.O. box from Lowe's Angels. There was no name. Her heart gave a little flutter as she picked up the box. It wasn't heavy, but it felt substantial. She walked to the back room where her father was reading a newspaper in his favorite chair. "What is it?" her father asked, looking over his glasses. "I'm not sure," she said. She found a pair of scissors and carefully cut through the tape. She folded back the brown paper to reveal a plain, white cardboard box. Inside, wrapped in layers of soft, white tissue paper, was a book. She lifted it out gently. It was an old book. The cover was worn leather, bound in deep blue with gold lettering on the spine. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw the title. It was a first edition copy of The Little Prince. It was the exact same book she had read to her father in the hospital when he was at his sickest. It was the book that had given her comfort during the darkest days, the one she had mentioned to the stranger on the bench that afternoon. She opened the cover. The smell of old paper and vanilla filled the air. On the inside cover, in handwritten black ink, was a note. It wasn't long, but the handwriting was distinctive, messy and jagged, just like the phone number he had given her years ago. She read the words silently. "I saw this in a shop in the city, and it made me think of the story you told me about your father. The world is a better place because you stayed. Keep building." Kay, she didn't need a last name. She knew exactly who it was from. A tear rolled down her cheek and landed on the creamy page. She quickly wiped it away so it wouldn't stain the paper. She looked up at her father, her vision blurry. "Read it to me," he said softly, sensing her emotion. She held the book with both hands, treating it like a holy relic. She read the note aloud. Her father listened, a slow smile spreading across his face. He nodded his head slowly. "He's a good man," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "He didn't have to remember." "He did, though," she whispered. She traced the letters of the note with her fingertip. "He remembered everything." She placed the book on the mantelpiece above the heater in a place of honor. It sat there not just as a gift, but as a symbol. It was a reminder that kindness has a long tail. One act of generosity, one moment of sitting on a bench and listening, could ripple out for years. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the shadows grew long in the shop, a young mother came in with a toddler. The shop was mostly empty, the quiet settling in for the night. The little girl was holding a stuffed animal and looking around with wide, curious eyes. She wandered away from her mother and walked over to a shelf of wooden toys. She reached out to grab a colorful block, but she was too small. She started to whine, frustrated that she couldn't reach. Her mother was busy looking at a greeting card and didn't notice right away. The young woman watched the scene unfold. For a second, she flashed back to her own struggle on the bench, the feeling of being overwhelmed and unseen. She walked out from behind the counter. She didn't rush. She walked over and knelt down beside the little girl. "Need some help?" she asked, her voice warm and gentle. The little girl looked up, startled, but then nodded. The woman reached up and carefully selected a few blocks, placing them on the floor within the child's reach. She sat down on the floor with the girl, right there on the worn wooden planks. She began to stack the blocks, building a small tower. "See, we just put one on top of the other," she said, smiling. The little girl giggled and clapped her hands, knocking the tower down. They laughed together. The mother turned around, smiling at the sight. "Thank you," the mother said. "She's having a hard day, missed her nap." "It happens," the shop owner replied. "We all have hard days." She helped the girl stack the blocks again, teaching her how to balance them. In that moment, she realized she was doing exactly what the stranger had done for her. She was seeing someone who was struggling, and she was stepping in to help carry the load, if only for a few minutes. She was passing the kindness forward. The woman and her daughter left a little while later, waving goodbye from the street. The shop owner locked the glass door and turned the sign to closed. She flipped off the lights, leaving only the warm glow of the lamp near the register. She looked over at the mantelpiece one last time. The blue book sat there, catching the light. It was a physical connection to the man who had changed everything without asking for anything in return. He hadn't saved the shop with money. He had saved it by making her believe she was worth saving. She walked to the back room to say goodnight to her father. He was already dozing in his chair, a peaceful look on his face. She covered him with a soft blanket and whispered, "Good night, Dad." She walked out the back entrance into the cool night air. The stars were bright, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp autumn air. She felt strong. She felt capable. She felt like she could handle whatever tomorrow brought, because she knew she wasn't alone. The kindness of a stranger had become a part of her, and now it was a part of the world she was building. She got into her car, started the engine, and drove home, leaving the shop standing solid and proud in the dark, a beacon of light for anyone who might need it. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning.